Before I start any meeting, I like to have a purpose benefit check. I think that we should do the same here. I think that concept extends to small panel discussions quite effectively. So why are we here? We're here to talk about the use of IoT technology in buildings and how it can make buildings operate more efficiently, allow for a better experience, and save money. I think the benefit of this panel is that hopefully we all get a little bit smarter. And now the purpose benefit check. Is everyone in agreement that that's why we're here? Any dissenters? Okay, great. Clearly we're seeing a lot, IoT is kind of coming through the hype cycle, through that sort of trough of disillusionment and now really penetrating the market, right? We're seeing a lot of market adoption. There are various reasons why, but there's clearly a lot of market signals. Just a couple days ago, we saw Siemens announce the acquisition of Comfy, which was its third building IoT acquisition in just the last few months. So clearly, Siemens has a major plan in place, and they see this as part of the future and something that they want to drive forward. So we'll get into the discussion today. I'm going to try to break it down into three pillars: technology, markets, and policy. I feel that these are the three pillars that drive adoption of any new innovation, especially when it involves innovation related to hardware or infrastructure. So I'm going to hand it off to Sandra, who I'm going to let you guys know. Sandra was pulled into this panel about half an hour ago, when we had, and Sandra started working for the city of Chicago 19 days ago. So like she's in the hot seat tonight. But anything she says, we're gonna hold Ron to it, right? There you go, Sandra.
Thank you. So just quick background. I've been here in this position 19 days. I am an engineer by training, so I do have some technical background and understand a little bit about the Internet of Things. So I hope I can bring you some information about how the city is thinking about how to enact policies to advance adoption to make our city better. So that's all I really need to say for now. Thank you for inviting me on the panel.
Thanks for coming.
Mike, do you have it?
There you go.
Hi, I'm Mike Romanko. I'm with Cypress and Virus Systems. We're a small Silicon Valley-based company in San Jose, California. And we're part of the IoT spectrum that deals with all of the hard-to-do things that are part of digitization of getting data from buildings. So if you have a lot of analog devices and gauges and things that, hey, if you want to get sensor data, and IoT is all about data, our company helps facilitate that hard-to-do thing, and we do it non-invasively and strive for kind of short payback. So I'm the local senior sales director for Enlighted, for Enlighted. I used to work for Enlighted, for Cypress and Virus Systems, and working actively with a lot of the Chicago buildings that have some of the old legacy technology involved with HVAC.
Good evening, I'm Dan Dosell. Good to see some friendly faces out there from the past. Mr. Talbot in particular. Katie will be happy to know that my lapsed membership has now been renewed. I had to point that out to you.
I appreciate it.
I am with Building IQ. I started my career as an engineer as well, and fortunately you guys are stuck with a panel of engineers up here today, but we'll try to make it as entertaining as possible. I started my career with Honeywell many, many, many years ago. A lot of you guys weren't even a speckle in your parents' eye at that time. But what's important is change. And when I started in the industry, these were some of the first commercial building control systems that were rolling out in the marketplace. Came out of Honeywell. Honeywell had proprietary everything. Well, the world has changed. And that Honeywell site that I once worked at with 1,500 people Guess what it is today? The world's largest Lexus dealership, Bob Rorman Lexus. So things do change, and we hope in introducing what we're going to talk about tonight, and hopefully have some good discussion with you all. That change has come, and I'm part of an organization by the name of Building IQ. We're doing some really, really cool and advanced stuff. We started in Australia. Our headquarters are actually now located in San Mateo, California. One of the most beautiful places in the world, but if you try to get a hotel room there with Google and Apple and all these other Salesforce, Oracle, forget it. And if you're lucky to get one, you're going to pay about $1,000 a night. But we are an organization that really offers a platform of technology-enabled services. We help our customers to visualize how they're using energy on the very low end of the spectrum. We help our customers to analyze how they're using energy, and that comes from using what we call outcome-based fault detection, which uses artificial intelligence and machine learning. And we also help with control. My partner here, Mike Romanko, and I have been working on a number of sites where we can jointly work together to really create a great solution for a customer. And lastly, and the kind of the nirvana of what we do is what we call optimization. And optimization, again, uses artificial intelligence and machine learning to actually create a model, a thermal model. We learn the thermal characteristics of the building with the model. We use that model to actually drive change in the building throughout the day with temperatures and pressure points. So that's a quick introduction. We'll be here for the evening. If anyone has questions afterwards, feel free to grab us.
Thanks, Dan. Hold on to the mic, all right?
Got it.
Kick things off. So the first pillar, we're talking about technology. New innovations will never really be adopted by the market unless they pencil out, right? There's got to be a clear value proposition there.
Yep.
So, Dan, what technological advancements have you seen over the last few years that have allowed for these products and offerings to mature to the point that they are economically viable? And what technological advancements do you see coming in the future?
Sure, great question. So one of the greatest, or I should say, one of the quickest advances, I think, has been to how can we transform a building that maybe is an older building into a more modern structure. So you'll see oftentimes controls in buildings that are perhaps pneumatic, that have been there forever. Sometimes the thermostat is actually dangling off the wall. Those controls now can be quickly converted into direct digital controls. So now you have visibility into the space. You know what the temperature is. You have the ability to use strategies and setbacks that you didn't have before. And then that technology becomes an enabler for what I do in terms of optimization, in terms of using very advanced machine learning techniques to drive more optimization into the building. So the ability to really kind of fine-tune the building from a temperature, from an energy use perspective, but also at the same time, because all this data is now flowing into the cloud, we can process that data and identify things going on in the building that oftentimes operators don't realize are going on. So that's kind of a quick and dirty answer, Paul.
Great, thank you. Either any of the other panelists want to add to that, to what Dan had said?
Well, I think Dan made a really good point about what has happened pretty rapidly in terms of the technology advancement with buildings. I guess one of the things that we try to emphasize is being able to digitize a lot of different things in many different types of buildings. There's just a lot of what I'll call legacy technology in buildings that people want to access data, and sometimes that's not an easy task. And you run into a situation and say, somebody says, we have all this software for optimization. well, how do we get the data from the building on all these old devices? Do we have to rewire everything? Do we have to rip things out? Do we have to cut pipes and all that? So our kind of vision of the IoT space has been to find ways to enable to get that data easier, do it non-invasively, not have to run wires and that type of technology, so we can help to make software solutions like Dan's company has happen easier and do so with a pretty quick payback.
Yeah, so it sounds like ultimately the cost reductions in processors and advancements in wireless networks is really unlocking this. And with 5G coming, I think those opportunities are really going to explode, I would guess. So I think a lot more exciting things to come. Another point I wanted to touch on is in the technology spectrum is security. So this is a big concern. I would like to know your perspective on what customers are demanding or expecting in terms of security, what the concerns are, and what's being done about it.
Yeah. So actually, from what I do, I get hit with this question every day throughout the day. So part of our solution, and part of the reason why I get hit with this, is we're actually taking data out of the building and we're moving it up to the cloud. Because all of the advanced processing of streams of data, not only data that comes out of the building management system, but meter data, sometimes even sub-meter data. So there's a lot of information that we can pull out of the building and run up on our engines to create a model for the building to run off of. So oftentimes we get challenged. You know, and what we do as part of our solution is there is a small, what we call site agent that plugs into the customer's network to capture data. So that site agent has responsibility for calling up to our cloud and pushing that data up to our cloud. Now, where the security issue comes into play is you've got a device that is now pushing data outside of the customer's environment. But it's the way we kind of got around it, and the way we've gotten acceptance is the fact that it's our device that is calling up to the cloud. It's never the cloud calling into the site. So that's a major. Once the IT guys understand how that works, it's usually we can do it. So it all depends on how the application is architected.
And what about users on a platform? You might have a situation where you have many users, both locally and off-site. Is there a concern with security there in terms of having access?
Yeah, another good question. Actually, we have never really run into a roadblock as far as that's concerned. And the reason is, to access our portal, you have to have the proper credentials, just as you would accessing, you know, your pay information on ADP or your medical information on Blue Cross Blue Shield. If you have the right credentials, user ID and password, then you can access information without an issue.
Great. Thanks, Dan. All right, let's move on to markets. I got a lot of questions comes to markets. I think this is where it gets exciting.
Yeah.
I mean, just very basic questions like, what do customers want? Are they asking for IoT solutions? Like, is there an education process? What are customers looking for? What are they willing to pay for? Who wants to kick it off?
Yeah, let me.
Usually, at least in our business, when we're working with commercial buildings, we don't have customers coming to us and asking for an IoT solution per se. So customers don't usually come to us asking for an IoT solution. So more practically speaking, they're looking for an energy efficiency solution or a better control solution or a way to reduce maintenance cost or a way to improve tenant comfort. So when it comes to their building, I think if you bring up IoT, sometimes they'll kind of look at you and say, well, what's that? You know, especially if we're talking to engineers, chief engineers who are used to working with a lot older technology. So where it comes down to actual market needs and customer needs, we try to boil down the solutions to them to make them very simple. And when it does involve the internet, we end up usually translating for them what the benefits of the internet are for that particular application. In our case, we're not directly connected to the internet. Usually we're internally on an intranet. So the building's automation system would be connected somehow on a LAN network, and then if they want to feed out to another solution, it's their choice. So, but we don't often get, at least in our space, probably because we're dealing with a lot of old technology, get asked about something specific to IoT.
So why are they buying your solution? It's not because it makes the facility manager's job easier, is it?
Potentially, yes. Yeah.
And they'll pay for that?
Yeah.
Or is there what other value may accrue?
Yeah,
Is there economic?
well, if they have old technology, usually they're approaching us because of obsolescence, and they have old control devices that are 100 years old in terms of their design. They haven't changed much over the years, and so they want to get something modern, digitized. They want to get more information. Usually I think the driver for the IoT, and especially with our company, is the need for more information and visibility into specific parts of the building.
Great.
Yeah, and I think it depends on the customer, because we have different segments, obviously. So, you know, we work in commercial real estate, we work in healthcare, so a hospital, medical office space. Oftentimes you've got a portfolio, a company may have a portfolio of medical office buildings, and they have zero visibility into those sites. So one of the things that you can begin to do immediately is begin to provide them visibility into the locations so that they can start to manage those sites better.
When there's a portfolio of assets involved, I mean, we're talking now about CFOs getting involved, right? In the decision-making process. What payback are they looking for?
Immediate. No, I think...
Well, if it's being financed, that could be the case.
Yeah, it varies depending on who it is you're talking to. So oftentimes, you know, usually the ideal situation is where you have a 3-year or less payback. I mean, I think that's kind of the commonality I encounter. Now, with the way these solutions are rolling out today, you may not necessarily have to write a big capital check to pay for a project.
All right, tell us about this. How are they financing this? How does it work?
Right, so we've actually looked at a number of these, and what we found is if we could perhaps bring the project in on a subscription basis, spread the cost over a number of years, you end up cash flow, in many instances, cash flow positive the whole way. It's when you factor in not only the incentives from ComEd, but also just the operational savings and the energy savings that you're going to realize. And so you haven't written a check out, you're cash flow positive the whole way. Perhaps you could use the rest of that capital on another project somewhere in your building or in your hospital or in your university or in your K through 12 school district to do some other projects that you really need to take on.
Sandra, you want to jump in here?
Sure.
Yeah, I think this is where you might grab the microphone up.
All right. So there are a couple threads that are really resonating with me. Just before I came to the city, I worked at 7th Wave, we were running a pilot that was looking at how to improve the performance in buildings, how to get owners to think about energy targets and how to get them data to help them make better decisions. And I feel like what we're talking about here directly feeds into that. And in my new role now, I would really like to explore that conversation further and talk to folks internally about how do we enact a policy that focuses on outcomes for buildings, new and existing. So I think there's great potential in both. And outcomes would be building on the benchmarking ordinance we have now and all the data we've collected and looking at how to help buildings get even better and continue to improve their performance. So that's an example where I think the city could get involved in enacting policies to continue to improve our performance and also look at new construction, which is something I don't think we've looked at beyond code, at least at this point. So those are the things that resonate with me in talking about data and the Internet of Things.
Thank you, Sandra. There's another important complex issue when it comes to selling new solutions into commercial buildings, and that's the challenge of split incentives. You have value accruing to different stakeholders, and the interests aren't always aligned. You have developers, GCs, architects, tenants, property managers. You have lots of different people involved, influencers and decision makers. And the challenge when you're selling is who do you sell to? What's the pitch? How do you manage this challenge? I'd love to hear what your approach is, and maybe some folks in the audience later can tell you that you're doing it right or you're doing it wrong. And maybe there will be some interesting disagreement on this topic.
That's fair. Go ahead.
Well, Dan and I both can relate to that particular challenge in terms of stakeholders, especially when you talk about commercial buildings. You have tenants, multiple tenants in a building, then you have a property manager, then you have a building owner, and they may hire out another separate engineering service company. So there's multiple stakeholders, and I would say more recently we've been running into this issue on project after project as to who do you start with, who's best to start with, and then how do you go about and navigate that entire series of stakeholders. And it's kind of a follow the money type of experience where you're looking for the people that understand the building enough to know that, hey, we have needs, we have to make improvements, prioritize them, and then hope that those same people understand what the monetary financial path is to accomplish that. And every stakeholder has a different perspective. So I don't know that we have a really good solution, but we hope that things like what Dan talked about earlier, the subscription model, to take away the whole capital issue, kind of pull that off the table. The other things that come up are, and this is a really big one with commercial buildings, is what is in that lease? How is that lease constructed? So if the lease is constructed in a manner where the owners are not allowed to take on any new debt, then that kind of takes off any kind of off-balance sheet financing or any of those kind of even a subscription model vehicle. So you really almost have to take it on a case-by-case basis, learn about the customer. Very commonly, because we're talking about technology, we will start with the building chief engineer, and if they embrace the technology as solution for their building because they know the problems in the building, they're hearing from tenants every day, then oftentimes we'll follow their lead as to how to go about and address the needs and interests of the different stakeholders and try to get approval one step at a time. So That's been our approach. I don't know if there's any magic answers. It'd be interesting to hear from people in the audience about that later on. So,
I'm going to go a little bit further. And we had a situation recently. I won't mention the name of the owner of the building, but a major company owned the building, and they had it was a multi-tenant building, and we pretty much put together a pretty rock-solid business case for this building, and we got kind of stopped saying, well, wait a minute, if we generate this energy savings, that means we have to go back per the terms of our leases with our tenants, and credit them back a bunch of money. And that actually was a problem for them. So that was on a commercial real estate building. And then who you're dealing with in terms of stakeholders, sometimes the local engineering and facilities management people are local. Sometimes the owner's in Japan. And sometimes you have a situation where the facility manager doesn't necessarily understand, or the general manager may not understand the solution, and holds back presenting it to the owner, which is a very frustrating thing for us. So we've seen that on the commercial side of things. On the healthcare side, I've actually seen a situation where a hospital said, no, I don't want to do a subscription, I want to buy it. And I said, oh, that's really interesting. Why? And she said, well, because we're afraid that our funding is going to be cut from the government for patients, and so we want to keep our operating expenses as low as possible. So that was an interesting situation with the healthcare. Now we have another healthcare situation we're looking at now where they want to roll out on a subscription basis. And then lastly, I had a situation with a higher ed university, it wasn't DePaul, Dudley, where I was meeting with the director of facilities, and he said, you know what, in order to do this project, I would have to fund it out of my budget, but the benefits go back to the university as a whole. And I'm like, oh. So these are the types of things that we see as we go around, and if you guys have any help for us, we'll take it.
Thanks, guys. And I think it's also interesting to consider how the dynamic changes between new construction and retrofit. And I don't think we have time to really get into it right now. But when you have a developer, like, what do they care about a tenant's future energy costs? But that's where the third pillar kind of hopefully makes things interesting with policy. And you don't need to be a policy maker to understand how policy can help drive market adoption of new technology and new solutions. But I think it's a really interesting issue to think about, and I'm gonna go to Sandra here for her perspective, and not even necessarily representing the city, but also her experience with Seventh Wave. But if you could shed some light on some programs that you think are really helping to drive market adoption, that would be great.
Thanks. I'll do my best. So I'm 19 days into this, again, in terms of thinking about what policies can shape adoption of technology. In my experience at Seventh Wave, two things happened. Actually, it's in the 10 years I've been here. We adopted this benchmarking ordinance, which has become successful. We've got data from tons of buildings, and now we're able to go back to those same buildings and figure out, like, what's the next policy we need, or what's the next initiative we need to launch to help them improve their performance. So that's been pretty successful. We also have a program called Retrofit Chicago, which is voluntary. We engage building owners and help them set a target for reducing their energy use based on a baseline. And that has been fairly successful as well in helping buildings become better. And I think there's a theme there that we'll always be looking for ways to help buildings become better and save even more energy. I mean, there's still so much to do. And 72% of our emissions come from buildings in Chicago, and we've reduced it, I believe 18% I think is the number that came out in the latest report. So we still have room to improve there. So we'll continue to look at how we keep helping our building owners achieve even greater savings. And the way we do that, in my observation, not as sustainability officer, has been offering technical assistance, having one-on-one conversations, doing walkthroughs in the building, and identifying, helping the owners identify where their operations could improve. If there are fans that are on, if you're heating and cooling simultaneously. These are common things that are going on in buildings right now. They're still happening. Controls can help identify those, and then we need to educate the owners on how to fix them. So it's really hands-on, basic communication and relationship building that will help us achieve the next level, I think.
Great, thanks. Guys, how have you leveraged policy to help sell your products and services?
I would say our primary vehicle has really been incentives from the local utilities, Commonwealth Edison in particular, since we affect electricity, usually with building controls, and then on the gas side, People's Gas. So any of the state policies to give the utilities goals to keep pushing energy efficiency is a big significant impact in our space with buildings. So we hope those continue. We understand Commonwealth Edison has a very big budget and is continuing pretty aggressively looking for new innovative technologies, IoT-based technologies to fund and sponsor and get people to use.
Yeah, I would say same here with policy. So oftentimes, well, in our case, the law says, hey, you got to collect so much money for energy efficiency programs, and that money now has to get paid out. So that works quite well from certain perspectives. And not only here, and is our company, we've participated in utility programs in the XL utility zone in Colorado. We've worked with NYSERDA in New York, and these tend to be the major drivers for us in terms of helping to finance projects and make the cash flows look very attractive when you go through the business case.
Great, thanks guys. So I think we're ready to wrap up and move to Q&A, but before we do that, I need to do a couple of shameless plugs for my portfolio companies, because if I didn't, I wouldn't be doing my job, especially when I have an audience of really, really relevant influencers and decision makers. So let me hit 3 of our companies in our portfolio. We have IntelliHot out of Galesburg, Illinois. They're manufacturing on-demand hot water heaters for commercial buildings. They've been in market for a few years. They're really scaling the business. So they have a 60-story high-rise near Millennium Park. All the domestic hot water provided by tankless on-demand hot water heaters. They're modular. They can stack 4, 6, 8 of them. One of them breaks down. The software makes it so that the others can pick up the slack while that 6th one gets repaired. So they can really right-size the system for whatever the building needs. Second one, these are all really actually more of our mature companies. 75F out of Minnesota. They have a turnkey out-of-the-box solution to make HVAC systems in small and medium-sized commercial buildings smart and dynamic. So you can take a single zone HVAC system and then create multi-zones out of it with their very easy to install retrofit solution. And the last one is Igor out of Des Moines, Iowa. They have a power over Ethernet connected LED lighting system. So think VoIP phone systems now for lighting. It's part of the digital ceiling movement. Forget the copper wiring and conduit. So this is more targeting new construction than retrofit, but you can run Cat5, Cat6 Ethernet cable through a ceiling, connect it to Igor-enabled lighting fixtures, and you suddenly have a very efficient lighting system with really limitless control at the device level. It's really a very cool technology. So sorry for the shameless plugs there, Jamie, but let's jump into Q&A.
Yeah, I'll do some pointing and bring mics if anybody needs one.
What's that? I thought he said Intella. I don't know how to spell it.
So I have a question to get things started. As a GC, we're asked a lot what we're doing to get this technology implemented, and my answer is usually I don't have a lot of control over that because we're not designing the systems and we're not paying for the systems, we're just building them. So when you are doing your business development or trying to get people to adopt this technology, who are you actually targeting typically?
Yeah, so that's a good question. So in the new construction area, we know we need to target the MEPs, mechanical, electrical, plumbing organizations out there that typically will be part of the specification in new construction. And, you know, sometimes when you have, you know, only so many resources and there's only so many hours in the day, we don't necessarily get there. Plus with new construction, there's definitely usually a time period, and that comes into play too when you look at the business. So, but it's something that we've recognized and we've identified and definitely need to begin to establish those relationships so that we are spec'd in. The other thing too, just another plug, is with our technology, in a brand new building that's going out, our technology can actually be used to help commission that building. And that's an important thing. I think oftentimes that's a step that gets overlooked. And we've actually have used our technology to help the customer get that building set just right. So, good question, Jamie.
All right. Do you want the mic or?
Oh, yeah, I guess I can get it. Oh, I'm gonna do something.
Whoa, you got a short cord.
Yeah. On new construction, if I have a land system, I could do a portion of that wireless to a certain extent, and I can get most of the data to even to the controller level. So what's the value add by going this route? The stuff you mentioned, there are also software that can help commission if you have a new building and have a conventional control system. So can you explain a little bit the value add in new buildings?
Yeah, so the value add in new buildings, I think, comes from the fact that once you know everything is set properly in terms of the building management system and all the mechanicals are working properly and everything's communicating the way it should, then the next step, the next value add that a building IQ brings is in optimizing that building on a daily basis. And that's where you get into, I'm taking the point data, I'm taking the meter data, and combining that with weather data, and also utility tariff information, and also occupancy of the building, obviously, and processing all of that information to arrive at a model that, on today, June 27th, that building should be running off of. So there are many, many, many different points in the building. And what happens is the chief is adjusting or making adjustments in the building management system throughout the day. We're taking that guesswork out of the picture and doing it automatically with optimization. So we're actually writing to the zone set points and pressure set points slight changes throughout the day to achieve energy reduction.
So in a conventional control system, I can also do that, right? So you're providing the knowledge as a value add, or the hardware itself that actually can do more than a conventional control system.
Yeah, it's a little bit of both, because not in the conventional system you got schedules that are set. You might do static pressure reset. And you should do all that. You may take advantage of optimum start-stop in the building, which you should absolutely be doing. This is going a step beyond. it's going one step out there. The piece of our technology that I'm referring to as optimization was actually developed in a laboratory in Australia, the Australian National Laboratory, in conjunction with Argonne here. And over 50 man-years of development time went into the creation of optimization. It's a very, very, very unique piece of technology that I'm not aware of anyone out there that's doing this.
So I guess building on that, being an engineer, so I have this, I don't design anymore because so as a design engineer, if I start really pushing that kind of control over your side, how do I know you're protecting my design? Because a lot of that stuff at times it tends to be a black box, right? Your analytics, all those are proprietary, those are you. How do I know as an engineer to trust that?
Well, I think that's a fair question. I think what I would do as an engineer, I would say, okay, let me talk to a couple of your clients and see if this is really proven technology. Is it really working?
That's anecdotal. Like writing data. You're an engineer.
Yeah, you're an engineer. Right.
Talking about the dashboard. Automated.
Oh, okay. You're right. So another part of the platform that we have is what's known as automated measurement and verification. So we're tracking how you're performing from the initial baseline. Now, we love it if the building is sub-metered and we have metered data that goes down to each individual component in the building. That's terrific. But if we don't, then we have to work with whole building interval meter data that we can get from ComEd as a baseline.
Or people's.
Or people's, right.
Or wherever, utility.
Or wherever, New York,
Whatever
Excel.
utility basis.
Good question.
I don't think the mic will reach.
Yeah, it's not going to reach, so I'll just stand up. My name is Mark Melvin, Fixed Consulting. Jamie, getting back to what your question was, one of the big problems we have today with IoT is we have all the technology in the world. In this group, we don't have the delivery systems to make things work. Unfortunately, we have 32 disparate software packages within the facility, and no one looks at that and controls that. Now, what's happening, one of the big problems I've had with USGBC for a long time is that anyone from IT at all in this room? Anyone from IT? One guy. You're an IT guy? Yeah. And I probably am. Do you remember USGBC?
No.
Okay. So you just sort of this, you guys hear this. The point is that IT has never been part of the conversation when we build buildings.
Yeah.
So we have to bring them into that conversation up front. Thank God the city of Chicago and Chicago Public Schools, believe it or not, has assigned what we do in terms of IoT and building automation, all that stuff. We're now working for the IT department. So there are people out there discovering, there's a whole bunch of other high-end clients that are doing that. But the city of Chicago Schools, Chicago Public Education is putting all of that IoT stuff into one group, and it's the IT. It's a comment.
Yeah.
It's a great observation.
Yeah, that is. Now they're coming.
I don't need that microphone. Follow up on the IT side of things, I mean the infrastructure space, and that's one thing I think that was missing from this. So I talk a lot about IoT, and IoT really is kind of the end of the conversation. It's digital building is really what we're talking about as far as all these devices and digital devices. And what's really driving a lot of that right now is infrastructure. What we had 5 years ago as far as infrastructure and capabilities, from power over Ethernet to what we have today and what new standards that are created. Before, we only had the ability to power maybe up to 30 watts over infrastructure. Today, we can power up to 100 watts over low voltage infrastructure. And the beauty of that is now I can power up to 100 watts via low voltage infrastructure. Anything I connect to that is now connected to the network, which also means I have sensor data along with that device. It ties into the Igor message a little bit too, which I'm very familiar with. But all these different devices now that I can plug in and make a smart device and power via the Ethernet is driving a lot of this. Cisco's a big backer of this, and before we couldn't deliver the wattage capable of it, now we can, and we have the infrastructure capable of doing that. We take a look at designing new buildings, as that question came up. You know, take a look at designing a building. You may not design a building to run traditional electrical cabling to a light.
Right.
You may be designing that to run a 5E or Cat 6 cable for that device.
Yep.
Daisy chaining it. And then you bring up the whole idea of safety along with it too. So it's very interesting and definitely understand, but one of the things you mentioned, what's driving IoT, a lot of that has to be local infrastructure and capabilities that are now available.
Yeah, I guess I'll mention one of Igor's distribution channels are IT resellers. They see it as a big, I mean, not just Igor, but Power over Ethernet opportunities to sell to lighting systems to buildings and be able to install
I actually rep Igor locally.
it.
I actually rep Igor locally.
Nice to meet you.
Thank you.
There you got your point.
So I have a security related question, and that's around the risk around IoT-enabled buildings. So now that we can have sensors, so now that we have all this data, all these sensors, and even controls, like basically we're running industrial controls inside of commercial buildings, right? Industrial controls are going through kind of a security revolution right now because of the security issues with our grid. What's it going to take for implementers to realize that there's just as much risk putting all these controls, no matter what security you have in place, on the internet? So you've got all these sensors and all these ways to control boilers, control heating, lighting, and it's available on the internet. Maybe it's secured, maybe there's secure tunnels going through, but those are hackable, and they get hacked all the time. There's a website out there called Shodan. You can go out to Shodan and see literally tens of millions of IoT devices that have compromised credentials or no credentials out there. So you've got a high-rise now that you've built with all these controls available to you. How do you mitigate that risk other than insurance? Insurance is not an exception.
Well, I can tell you for our company, we're not actually connected to the internet. So we have wireless within the building. We use wireless technology that's based on wireless mice. And the other thing we built into the design,
Bluetooth?
what's that?
Bluetooth?
Not Bluetooth, wireless keyboards from Cypress Semiconductor. That was our parent company many years ago. So we're now a separate company. But in terms of security, the other things that we do are making the controls local as possible. In other words, all the intelligence is right there. So the only time we communicate over the wireless is to transmit data. So once every 5 minutes, we're waking up to transmit maybe 8 kilobytes of data, just really, or 80 bytes of data actually.
So you're not able to actually control them remotely.
Right.
It's literally just out.
Yeah, it's just out. So we can send a command to change the set points, but again, that's only updated every few minutes or when there is a change. But even during that process, the way our architecture is designed is essentially not hackable. So, I mean, it would take a long, detailed discussion to get into it, but we've had our systems tested by the Department of Energy, NIST, NASA, FBI, a lot of security experts. So are people very concerned about security and data, and we've passed many of those tests. So how we do that, there's a number of different ways. Take a long discussion here, but two of the key ways is to we're not connected to the internet all the time. And then it's only kind of on an as-needed basis when you're transmitting data. So,
Are there any other stakeholders that have access to it? Tenants, building owners?
Not typically, no. So usually just the building chief and whoever they assign, and it's all password protected. But yeah. So I guess if somebody hacked it, they could change the temperature up and down in the building. So, but that probably is a worst case scenario. But there's alarms and everything else built in, so somebody would find out right away if a temperature was going outside the original set point. So I mean, if somebody was hacking and doing something like that, we'd find out nearly instantaneously. So I don't know if that helps.
So I got a question here. If you transmit your signal only every so often, what can you use your system to control fire and life safety devices that will require immediate reaction if they detect smoke and fires, or those devices need to be treated differently?
Usually those devices are on an entirely separate system than ours.
Yeah.
I don't know about yours.
No, we're not doing any life
Yeah,
safety.
they're weird.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we're not involved with life safety, so I can't really
I
comment on
think
it.
there was one more question back
Okay.
there, and then we'll let everybody come up and bombard them.
I'm curious if anybody on the panel would care to speculate what area and sphere of IoT you think represents the greatest potential for IoT to really flourish.
Can you repeat the question?
Yeah.
What does anybody think represents the greatest area of potential breakthrough in IoT, whether it's technology markets or policy, where IoT could really be implemented widespread? And you can throw in your own biases if you want.
I've got,
Go ahead, Inspector.
I think that's actually a really good question to end on if everybody wants to give a thought on that one.
yeah. I'll take a first jump at this. I think that with all of the devices that are out there today, all the sensor data that's coming in, whether it's wirelessly or hardwired connected into a central management system, there's a tremendous amount of information that's coming across. And if you can take that information and start to look for changes in patterns in the building, maybe you see something starting to go wrong with a major air handler unit in the building or some other device in the building. Because of all this sensor data, and you can see changes that are occurring that shouldn't be occurring, if you can take that data and analyze it and run it through the artificial intelligence to start to look for these anomalies, then I think that's probably the greatest potential for all these IoT sensor devices that are out there. My 2 cents, anyway.
I'm not sure if I have an observation you want to say here.
Yeah, so I'd echo Dan's thoughts about that. So my passion is performance, building performance, one of them anyway. And I agree with Dan that having that data empowers owners and operators to improve the performance of their buildings. And if you, I won't go into the deep details, but you can incentivize an operator to improve performance. There are lots of ways to do that. You can incentivize building owners to do the same thing. You can incentivize design teams to build buildings that perform. The Internet of Things can provide the data to make the measurement and verification process easier, can give them a tool to improve performance. So I really think that the technology has the potential to unlock additional savings through performance in buildings.
Could go like a Black Mirror route, but now I'll stay with that. I think the greatest opportunity is really optimization at the individual user level. So the idea that the security system sees you coming and unlocks the door because it knows you have access, and then you walk into the conference room where the building knows you have a meeting scheduled, and the PowerPoint that you were working on last night is already pulled up waiting for you, and the room has been cooled to the temperature that the building knows you prefer. Really, along those lines, I think that's where things are probably headed. Let's have a drink. Thanks for coming, everyone.
I think that just disconnects the cable from the mic.
Put it on the end.
I grabbed you before everybody starts talking. You have Susan.
Hi, Susan. Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you. Thanks for coming. Have you? I think so. Honey, I was just corresponding with Jamie Marie yesterday about her parent. I'm going to meet with her once she gets into the role as litigation, but make intelligent glazing systems for building facades into Claire. Yeah, so we're going at SFO right now. We're in Boston Logo, Charlotte Douglas. We just got 500,000 square feet in Dallas Fort Worth. So yes, and I can't believe the director of sustainability is sitting before me.
And I'm sorry I don't have cars yet.
That's all right. Okay, yeah, but once you get your role, we would be so appreciative if we could just talk for 30 minutes and do an introduction. I'm so excited to introduce you. I was like, what? It's Christmas, yay. So,